Philanthropology and the Good Road is brought to you by AMD, Advanced Micro Devices.
Philanthropology is the companion piece to our TV show on public television called The Good Road.
I'm Earl Bridges.
And I'm Craig Martin, and we capture stories of mercenaries, missionaries, and misfits.
It's a raw look at the messy and complicated business of global philanthropy, and Craig and I set off around the world to places where people are doing good.
Inner city ghettos, border camps for refugees, rural health clinics, and fully armed anti-poaching teams are some of the impossible situations we'll explore in Season 1.
In these half-hour episodes, we explore the messy cocktail of community, culture, and compassion with the do-gooders who see the world's greatest problems and say, hell, I can fix that.
It's positive and powerful stories of the brightest lights in the darkest corners.
It's authentic storytelling about real people tackling complex issues.
It's Batman, not Superman.
We're looking for change makers,
do-gooders,
social impact renegades who risk it all and ask nothing in return.
It's people like you. You're our people, our tribe.
And this is our show.
Check out The Good Road on your local PBS station starting in April.
Guillermo Paxton is an author who's recording an interview for an upcoming book on gangs in America. He is interviewing Jesse Darrington and Decino Dees. It's the middle of the afternoon at 3 p.m. in a place called Alabama Village.
What you're about to hear is something that is heard way too often in this neighborhood. I will warn you, it's not suited for all audiences.
How do you think that is that, because I know not everybody's going to the church. Oh shit. Goddamn, just like that.
What you just heard was a young man named Mayo getting shot to death in a ghetto called Alabama Village, just outside Mobile. That is where our story of the white savior complex all starts.
When we drove into the village for the first time, it appeared to be a violent battleground set against the backdrop of a typical southern suburb. Burned out in bullet-ridden homes, garbage in the streets, there because the sanitation department won't go into the neighborhood, and a major thoroughfare blocked by the police barricades.
And yet inside, life goes on like anywhere else in America. Well, with a near constant daily sound of gunfire.
In this episode of Philanthropology, we talk to the founder and director of a community center called Light of the Village. John Eads addresses what it's like to be a white man serving and helping in a community of African American kids and adults who struggle daily to survive.
There has been a lot of talk in the world of charity and philanthropy about the white savior complex. We also visit with one of the former residents of Light of the Village, Decino Dees.
And an ex-Hollywood executive and founder of Good Black News, Lori Lakin Hutcherson, who sheds light on the issues from a successful black woman's perspective.
Stay tuned for this really compelling and in-depth conversation.
And stick around for our road trips towards the end of the podcast. So it seems like there's an infinite amount of information uploaded to the internet every day. Sometimes it's hard to know what's accurate or factual or believable.
That's exactly why we love having the Great Courses Plus. This is valuable, in-depth content we can trust.
This streaming service offers thousands of objective, unbiased lectures from respected professors who really know their stuff, offering their unique, expert perspectives on topics ranging from the science of evolution to the mysteries of human behavior, even how to learn a new language or how to cook, much, much more.
And with the Great Courses Plus app, we can watch or listen anytime, anywhere. We highly recommend the course Understanding the Dark Side of Human Nature.
This course tackles big questions. What is evil, and how can we be sure that we don't cause suffering? And an even bigger question, why do we kill?
Yeah, well, that's the royal we with the whole why do we kill, right? Mm-hmm. It's a really great topic that you won't want to miss. So sign up for the Great Courses Plus today. Don't wait any longer. Go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/thegoodroad.
Remember, thegreatcoursesplus.com/thegoodroad.
You know, Earl, you and I have talked a lot about this image of the old white guy helping poor black kids with flies on their eyes in Africa. It's kind of iconic in Western media.
Yeah, and it's a hard topic to even address.
Yeah. So even one of my close friends, kind of played that role on TV sometimes. And so we just decided to drill down into this topic of the white savior complex with a couple friends who we've gotten to know pretty well. John Eads, he's the founder of something called Light of the Village in a place called Alabama Village. And he runs a community center. He's white. His wife is Hispanic. and Decino Dees. Decino is a great guy who grew up in that community. He's African American and pulled himself out of just this extreme poverty. So let's just jump in and chat a little bit with Decino and first find out about how he grew up.
Growing up, I stayed in the house with my mom. It was my 4 sisters and my 3 brothers, and we shared everything. I was talking about everything. Like my dad went over there, so I had a stepdad, and he was on drugs. So when he wasn't on drugs, he was the meanest person in the world. But when he got on drugs, he was nice. Like we could go outside. Normally we couldn't. It just seems always he just was mad. Something was like always bothering him. And like he took it out on us. On like summer mornings, we would go cut grass. We would never get none of the money at all. Like we would just get a bag of chips and juice. We knew like once we got home, if he kept the money, then he would get drugs or whatever. Then we can go outside and play. So at the time, it didn't bother us because we was young and really didn't care. One time, we was in the house and we didn't have power for like a year. And that's when our water got turned off. So I was off for like 6 months. So it was like when we would cook or even like warm water for a bath, we would like do it on a barbecue grill. It was bad. Like my mom, she never worked. She took care of like 8 kids, and it was just hard. But now I live on my own. I work full time, and life I guess is just way better. I don't have to share nothing no more.
Decino needed a lot of help to put him on his path. It didn't just happen overnight. The problem is, amongst all these drug deals and shootings and, his stepdad who's an addict, he didn't really have much support until he met John and Dolores Eads. D-Lo, as they call her, and John really worked hard to get Decino on a path out of the drugs and violence. And so honestly, Earl, from all appearances, they feed that white savior stereotype.
Yeah. John is white. He's in an all-black neighborhood.
Yeah, and
D-Lo is Hispanic, but
right.
It smacks of everything that you would have thought is classic white savior complex.
Yeah, definitely. So he told us a little bit about what it was like to first meet John and D-Lo.
These white people crazy. I was like, man, I'm not talking to them. Like, so for like 4 years, I never said nothing to them. They talked to me though, but I never talked to them. It was summer morning. We was walking with my stepdad cutting grass. I seen all these white people at the church just playing with the little black kids. I was like, man, these people are tripping. White people just come to the neighborhood and just play with the black kids unless they want something. At first, I was like, I'm not going over there. And eventually, I don't know, me and my brother, we just ran over and started playing because I was like, our stepdad stopped to talk to somebody. And so we just left the lawnmower and everything right there. And we ran over to play with the kids or whatever. And that's when he came over. He was like cussing us out and just like calling us all kind of names. And that's when D-Lo heard him. And D-Lo talked to him for a minute. And then that's when John walked over. And I don't really know the conversation between him and John, but we ended up staying that day. And normally this man never gives in to nobody. But he did that day. And I was just surprised.
So we asked John what his impressions were when he first met Decino. And I just kind of love his descriptions, knowing Decino as we know him, and then hearing John say what he was like at the very beginning of all this.
He was a thick, kind of a big kid who said absolutely nothing. And I wasn't even sure whether he liked us, liked being at the ministry. Like I say, the first few times we saw him, he was working. He was cutting grass. And he was out there cutting grass in these funky shoes, man. You could tell they didn't have much. Again, that's common with our group. Not because they're black, but because of where they live, okay? But he was that. And really, like I said, I can't say we didn't give him a lot of attention. He was around, but he just didn't speak, man. And, that was a good lesson for us. You don't really know who's listening. Truth is, bro, we learned that in the prisons and the juvenile facilities as well, back when we did that, for about 10 years before we got involved in the street stuff. You'd be surprised. You don't think they're listening, but man, they're hear everything you say. And that's always impressed us. And we see that with our group now.
Like I seen my mom struggle. And I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to have to ask and beg for anything. The thing that hit me was like when I met Mr. John and D-Lo, like I seen that it was another way to live, and I didn't have to struggle by just going to get a job for myself and stuff like that. Like I just didn't want to struggle anymore.
You know, it's probably fair to say that if you're white people like us, Earl, that when you walk into a neighborhood like Alabama Village, if you walk in without that kind of positive attitude and humbleness, looking at folks as your equal and people who you are there to help, but also people you can learn from. If you walk in with that attitude, I think you avoid this whole white savior thing. One of the things that, was fun about, talking with DeCino is he calls BS on a lot of this stuff, in terms of the perceptions of John and D-Lo, because he's like, no, he has his perspective, which is they're actually there to do great work and help his family and stuff. So he himself gets kind of irritated by the whole idea of the white savior. But it is a serious, it really is a serious topic, and you have to look at it without, going in being patronizing and feeling like you're there to save the day. If you go in in humility, like the Eads do, I think it's great. But I will tell you, talking to John, it is hard for him when he hears that criticism of being the, quote, white savior.
And, it's funny, Craig. I don't hear that much from the kids on the street. I hear it more from people in the suite. And let me explain that to you. It's the way I define it. The kids where we are, and you've been where we are, the most violent and most impoverished neighborhood census tract in Alabama. It's pretty much 100% African American. And that doesn't seem to be a problem with them. The only time it seems to be an issue is people who are not in the street. Let me just put it that way. They're either in academia or in some political settings, or they have an agenda. They don't live there. And so first and foremost, as you've seen, our ministry is frontline street ministry, straight up. Been there 17 years, man, and we've seen it all. And one thing Morgan, who you've met, one of our interns and now staff, is that, we do life with these folks. And what's so cool, man, is the community calls the place God's house and our home. And it's almost like we've become part of the family. And I'll be honest with you, we don't get tangled up in white, black, or anything like this. It's almost silly to me. But to step back and to really look at that term, in some ways, and it's almost infuriating to me, all the kids that we've seen that have been killed, as you know, we've buried 31. We buried we buried our 31st person last month. And it just aggravates me to no end that people get on these rabbit trails about these, what I consider trivial. Now, I know other people don't consider it trivial. That's fine. But just kind of get out of our way.
Philanthropology is brought to you by First Republic. Since 1985, First Republic has had just one goal: deliver extraordinary service that always goes beyond client expectations.
Because no two clients are alike, First Republic designs financial solutions for individuals and businesses that are customized to help meet your needs and goals.
Reach out today and you'll be connected with a dedicated banker who will be your primary point of contact throughout your relationship with the bank. You can call or email your banker at any time for advice or to get help with whatever arises.
Because they understand your total financial picture, your banker can recommend the services and products that are best suited to you or your business.
And they're committed to staying objective, so it's always about what makes sense for you at every stage and not about what's most profitable.
If you're ready to discover how a personalized approach to banking can make a meaningful difference in your personal and business outcomes, visit firstrepublic.com to learn more.
Member FDIC. We saw a lot of examples of racism when we were in Alabama Village. There was the father-son, remember, that you met at that bar?
Yeah.
Tell that story.
So I remember, you go into this bar at the end of every evening because it's kind of sad to be in the village, and so you kind of unwind.
Well, and we unwind every night.
Okay. Well, I was trying to make an excuse for it,
Right.
But I remember I walk in and we're sitting there, and this guy comes over. No, actually, I go up to him. I will go walking by, and he goes, "Hey, where are y'all from?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I'm from Richmond, and Earl's from Charleston." And he says, "What y'all doing?" Because he obviously, me and my red shoes,
right?
He didn't figure we were from around there. And he said, "What y'all doing?" I said, "Well, we're doing a TV show, and we're working with this group in Alabama Village." He immediately goes, "Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to help those?" And he uses the N word.
In front of his son.
In front of his son, his teenage son. And I just remember saying, you're going to say that word in front of your son? You're going to teach your son that word? That's horrible. And this pretty big Alabama guy gets up, stands up, and I'm like, oh crap, I'm about to get beat up.
In Alabama Village. No, I mean, this is the story of race. I mean, a lot of people see it and they look at the optics and they see you for what they think you are, this white guy with red shoes,
Right.
Bunch of Hollywood types.
Exactly.
And you know what we didn't see in Alabama Village? Not a single Native American. So we all came from somewhere else.
Right.
And we have all of these optics that we're dealing with. I thought it was interesting to turn to a professional, kind of an expert on the subject. So I went down the road and interviewed this Dr. Matthew Huey, and he had written a book called The White Savior Film, which I thought for us on this exploration of what this is, or what we're doing, I thought it was perfect. Yeah. So let me set up who Dr. Matthew Huey is. He's an associate professor of sociology at the University of Connecticut, and he specializes in the study of race and racism, specifically about that relationship between how people make meaning and how do they come to understand race and racism, and that relationship with actual objective levels of racial inequality and racism, and how the whole thing really reproduces each other.
I think one of the things we wanted to know, Earl, right, is are we inadvertently making a show that's a white savior TV show?
That's why we bring in the professionals.
Yeah. So are we contributing to that negative paternalistic colonial thing?
Yeah.
And why, does all that matter? And why do we care, I think, is what we're trying for.
All right, let's so we'll get back to some of the filmmaking pieces as well, because
Right.
this is one of the whole reason why we're doing this piece is we're just concerned about, not trying to come off as, I don't know, overly good, because
Okay.
we're not. I mean, this is...
And you're scared of being called racist, right?
Ouch, that hurts. But it's kind of true, right? I mean, what's the worst thing that someone could call you?
A racist.
Last thing I want to be called is a racist.
See, that's what I mean. It's the ultimate
It's a very white thing
It's
of
the
me,
ultimate
but-
white slur, right? It's the thing that white people are scared of the
You can
most.
call me a cracker or a honky or
It doesn't
something, I
matter.
don't care, but you call me a racist, yeah.
No, I saw a comedian do this very skit the other day where he was saying exactly that. You can call white people cracker or au fait or all these terms that a lot of white people don't even know.
Right.
Well, the charge of racism is it's almost like an ethnic slur for white folks, right? Because you have all types of slurs and horrible things you can call people of color that have charged histories. You have a lot of slurs that people of color have used against white folks, but not a lot of white folks even know them and aren't even hurt by them, right? But if you call a white person a racist, they freak out,
Right.
So that's like the white slur for white people is
Right.
racist. What that does, I think, actually is shows the height of kind of white egotism, right? That we privilege white intentions to such an extent, right, that white people use that as a get out of racism card, where
Yep.
they say well, I didn't mean it, therefore that wasn't the thing.
Right.
But that's absolutely ridiculous if we take that analogy and apply it to anything else, right? I can say well, I didn't mean to break my leg when
Right.
I fell.
Yes.
Therefore, my leg shouldn't be broken. No,
Yeah.
the leg is broken even though I didn't mean to.
That's always that shitty apology where someone says, "I'm sorry that you misunderstood me."
Right. I'm sorry that you felt that way. Right. Yeah.
Right,
It's
yeah.
it's a non-apology, right? But it's based on the I think utter egotism of whiteness that all that matters are my intentions, and it doesn't matter what I actually do or the effects of what I do. You should be concentrating on what I meant.
It was a fascinating interview, and we'll post a link to the full conversation with Dr. Matthew Huey, where you can really deep dive into the discussions of, biological determinism, racial essentialism, on and on. But incredibly interesting. I don't think we really have time to get into all of it in this podcast. But I do think it helps to understand where this concept of a white savior complex came from.
But the white savior, as it's kind of developed in the recent couple centuries in a North American context, I think you have to go back to terms like manifest destiny.
Okay.
You have to look at ideas of the white man's burden, the famous Kipling poem, and understandings of great white hopes that have come out of boxing and sporting in North America. So first with manifest destiny, you have this understanding that white people, European descended folks, are entitled divinely to lands in North America, which meant a kind of interesting problem. That is, how do we deal with indigenous peoples? And there were many approaches. One of them was a very paternalistic approach, which was embodied in a saying called "kill the Indian and save the man."
Right.
Which is to try to get rid of the indigenous and literally whitewash them, form Indian schools, make their languages, their culture, their clothing, their food, any of their cultural traditions literally illegal. There was debate about whether he was, in fact, writing a kind of satirical parody of Western colonialism, or if he was, in fact, advocating it. And I think it was written for the Diamond Jubilee for the Queen of England. Nevertheless, any type of written thing is polysemic. It's open to many interpretations.
Right.
So some people read his poem as, oh, you're actually advocating white paternalism.
Right.
Other people saw it as a critique thereof. Regardless, one of those messages is a kind of rationalization of white paternalism, that it is the duty, a moral, ethical, religious, humanist calling of white people to go and save people of color, often from themselves.
Yeah. So that's a bit about how we ended up using this phrase, white savior complex. But how does that play out in films and TV shows?
Well, I think what it does is it relies, again, on notions of racial paternalism, right? In that I tell my students all the time, think about those films and then make the black or brown character being saved white and tell me if the film still works. And it often doesn't, right? Because we conceptualize people of color as victims, as needing to be saved, as problems, right? And that's long-standing. W.E.B. Du Bois, who is one of my favorite American sociologists, in his landmark work, Souls of Black Folk, posed this kind of question. He said, how does it feel to be a problem? And he said, how does it feel to be an object of contempt and pity? And we often think of racism and white supremacy as the contempt part, of people hating you, of actively trying to hurt you. But there's also this objectification of people of color as poor little objects that need to be saved from themselves, and that's the pity part. Du Bois was way ahead of his time, and that rendering of being an object of contempt and pity, I think, is carried forward into modern white savior films.
Right.
It's a device that especially white audiences can really feel good about, because it solves a kind of crisis of whiteness in which white people themselves are, I think, in a time today which they don't want to feel bad about whiteness, right? And so they're looking for any type of story that can address race, but not really address race. Address race in a way that makes them feel good. So it relies on tropes of sentimentalism,
Right.
racial essentialism, and biological determinism to say, oh, yeah, I'm better, but, I do good with it. And I do good with it, and I shed a little tear, and I'm like, oh, we're not all bad, yay.
Right.
And I feel better with my popcorn and Coke.
Which brings us to the question that we have as one of the basic explorations of this whole project. It's philanthropology. It's what are the motivations of the people who are doing good? And I really like the interview that you did with Dr. Lori Lakin Hutcherson of The Good Black News.
So Lori's really interesting because, first of all, she comes from the business.
She's Hollywood.
She's Hollywood. So I loved that, and I loved her perspective, baked into the industry. So very interesting stuff.
My name is Lori Lakin Hutcherson, and in addition to being a writer and producer of film and television, I also created and am the editor-in-chief and founder of a website called Good Black News, which focuses on positive news stories about Black people all around the world. I was fortunate enough to, a month before the movie went into production, was asked to come in and do some rewriting. So I did a production polish on the Hidden Figures script before it went into production. They just needed a little bit of help with the voices of the women and the perspective of the women as Black females. And I was very fortunate to be the person who was able to do that and bring some of that to the movie, because I majored in history and literature in college, in addition to having lived a whole life as a Black woman. So even though it was set in the 60s, there were still many things that they were dealing with in terms of entering into a workspace that was primarily white, primarily male, that I personally experienced myself when I was an executive at 20th Century Fox, where I literally was the first Black executive, male or female, to ever be in the development department. So I was actually able to bring some personal experiences that happened to me into what happened in the movie.
You know, this topic there's a lot of really kind of heavy stuff, and it sounds so negative, but Laurie does kind of give some good ideas of how not to be the, quote, white savior.
Well, I think, Craig, just like we're having a very honest conversation about the topic, and we are saying white person, Black person, ick, savior, all of that. Another myth I want to bust about the African-American community, if possible, is that white people tend to think that Black people hate them or resent them in some kind of way. And African-American people in general are extremely forgiving. If you come at somebody and you say, look, I don't know how this looks, I'm sorry if I'm stepping on toes, but I really want to help. Like, somebody with a genuine heart coming to you and offering what they have to offer goes a long way. And the fact that you told me that they've been working with this community for 15 years tells me that they're accepted. So whatever the optics are for somebody who comes to it for the first time, their record there, their level of experience there, their acceptance within that community communicates to me as a Black woman that, like, all right, they're cool people. They're in it. They get it. It's cool.
This episode of Philanthropology has been made possible by Advanced Micro Devices.
AMD. They're in our tribe of do-gooders, and we're excited to have them along on this journey of doing good in the world.
AMD is helping solve the world's toughest and most interesting challenges around climate action, quality education and good health, and well-being.
Tomorrow's breakthroughs start with the determination and inspiration of today.
Trust us, if you're going to do good, you need some smart people in your tribe.
Yeah, people smarter than you and me for sure. I love Laurie's interview, and she gave us some really honest feedback on how to avoid getting caught up in that kind of white savior label.
I think in general, if anybody who is an outsider of any community, whether it's Blacks to whites, whites to Blacks, and they're in a position of power, to me, that's a very important component of it. If they're in a position of power entering into the community, they have to be very honest about why they're there, and that they're there to listen as well as offer suggestions or assistance in certain ways. And if they prove to do that and they offer like flexibility within, like, it's like, okay, you guys want to do it this way, but this is really how it would really help us. They're like, okay, well, we'll try it your way with our resources. Then you've got a synergy. You've got, any kind of divisions or divisiveness will go away because people are coming together with a common goal, and they've come together, as you say, as equals, and they're working towards it together. Yeah, if you're not looking at all of the issues, racism, sexism, cronyism, capitalism, dictatorship, a lot of the efforts are definitely helpful, impactful, but it's not necessarily changing or causing the sea change that needs to happen so that people can actually live instead of just survive.
I wasn't sure I wanted to do an episode on the white savior complex, quite frankly. Because there's so much of it that's really, it relies on one of your senses that I think is your biggest liar, which is your eyes. A lot of times we use these sayings that say, I saw it with my own eyes, but that's, it's deceitful. And oftentimes I think you just close your eyes and you just, you view people from their heart or their actions that they have. So
Yeah. And, one of the things I say in a book I wrote about my experiences on the, working overseas is that when you're trying to help people, you really have to see them as your equal. If you don't see them as your equal, that's a real problem. And you got to kind of love them. I mean, you got to love them. You got to love working with them because it shows when you don't.
So check out our website. It's going to be philanthropology.tv, and there you're going to find behind the scenes, extended interviews, and some just funny stuff that Craig and I tend to get into. Next on Philanthropology, we'll explore how technology is having an impact on the world of philanthropy.
And specifically, we'll focus on virtual reality, or VR, and learn why it is called the empathy machine.
So join us for an interview with our VR director, Mark Lambert, who's notable for leading graphic teams on films like the Harry Potter series and Polar Express.
And we sit down for a conversation with one of the pioneers of VR research, USC professor Skip Rizzo.
You will not want to miss this exciting episode, I guarantee, because like Craig and me, you will learn something new. The Philanthropology Podcast is recorded at In Your Ear Studios in Richmond, Virginia, with direction from producer Carlos Chafin, engineering help from Andrea Steffel, soon to be Bukite.
Earl and I also get creative direction from Andy Dunsing, the Good Road Public Television Show. The theme music for Philanthropology was created by Jordan Martin of the band Door Mountain and can be found on iTunes.
We also want to thank all of our do-gooders who gave us their time, support, and gray matter.
And finally, we want to thank our original investors in all of this, our wives and kids. Specifically our wives who put up with us, Pam Bridges and Erica Martin.
And to all the girls I've loved before.
I'm going to read it just how they wrote it, okay? You ask if we for real. We live in that place where people shoot, sell, smoke, and steal. We in that neighborhood you forgot, where people hustle, get arrested, and get shot. See that duplex where people used to smoke crack? That's where our Bible study is at. This building shows concern for people's souls. Never mind those 5 bullet holes. Miss D'Lo is brown, Mr. John is white. That may be a problem for you, but for us, that's all right. While you stay up in your little huddle, they with us down here in the struggle. If you're dismissing this as just another street rhyme, why don't you leave the reporters and cameras and come visit us sometime? If you visit, come here with an open mind and a genuine desire to see and learn. If you come here with attitude, you better not make a wrong turn. So while you pass judgment about things you don't know, remember this place is God's house and our home.
We know if you're coming in to get praise for something, and we know if it's real or not. We know if you really love us or not. And so and I don't think it's a bad thing if people come in and help. They call it a white savior thing or whatever. Like, what if somebody black come in a black neighborhood and help out? Is it called a black savior? I don't really understand that. But if you're genuinely wants to help somebody, then don't feel free to do it. Don't do it because to get something back for it. Because most of the time you won't. Most of the time, the only thing you'll get back is a heartbreak.